We are not paying for this.
This is all you're getting.
This is also how you get. This is all you're getting. Take it. You can't be serious. We're reporting you.
The hinge on Edna Marsh's front gate had been broken for 11 months. She had mentioned it to her nephew twice, to her pastor once, and to the clerk at the hardware store on Birch Street, more times than she could accurately recall. And still every morning it scraped against the concrete with a sound like something being slowly and deliberately torn apart. On the morning Nathan Calloway arrived in Mill Haven, Tennessee, he heard that sound from the driveway of the rented room next door, and without quite deciding to, he walked over and looked at it. The hinge was rusted through at the joint. The gate itself was solid, good wood, old wood, the kind that had been painted over so many times that the layers had become the structure. But the hinge had been losing its argument with the Tennessee humidity for years and had finally given up. Nathan crouched down and looked at it, the way he looked at balance sheets when something was wrong. Not with anxiety, just with attention. "You fixing to stare at it or fix it?" said a voice from the porch. He looked up. Edna Marsh was in a rocking chair with a crossword puzzle folded across her knee and reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and she was looking at him with the patient expectation of a woman who had been watching men stand in front of broken things and do nothing about them for the better part of 80 years. "I could fix it," Nathan said. "Hardware store opens at 8, she said, looking back down at her crossword. "Bolts are about $2. Paint's on the third shelf on the left, if you're inclined." He was there when the hardware store opened. He bought the bolts and a tube of rust-stop primer and a good quality 2-inch brush and a gallon of white exterior paint. Because while he was crouching at the hinge, he had noticed that the fence itself was peeling in long, curling strips, the way old things peel when they have been patient too long, and the patience has finally run out. He looked at the paint for a moment in the store aisle. He was not a man who painted fences. He ran a company with 400 employees and a 9-figure annual portfolio, and a board of directors who sent him summary documents organized by priority level, and he had not painted anything since a summer cabin project with his father when he was 14. He bought the paint anyway. He did not think carefully about why. Thinking carefully about why he was doing things had contributed significantly to his difficulties over the past 31 years, and somewhere on the 400-mile drive from Nashville in the rental car that smelled faintly of pine air freshener and someone else's forgotten takeout, he had made a loose decision. For the next 10 days, he was going to try simply doing things instead of analyzing them first. The analysis could wait. The analysis had been running at emergency volume for 3 weeks, and it had produced exactly nothing useful, which suggested it was the wrong tool for whatever this particular problem was. He started on the hinge before 8:30. The rust stop went on first, worked into the joint with the corner of the brush. Then the bolt replacement. He had brought a wrench from the small tool kit in the trunk of the rental, which he had thought to check that morning the way he thought to check everything, automatically and without credit, and the gate opened and closed without sound. He stood back and looked at it and felt something small and complete settle in his chest. Then he started on the fence. The work had a rhythm that asked nothing of him except attention and patience, and he gave both freely because they were the things he had been least able to give to anything for months. Strip the loose paint, let the wood breathe, lay the white over the bare grain, in long, even strokes that overlapped at the edges. The Tennessee sun got serious about the day around 9:30, and by 10 his shirt was damp between the shoulder blades, and Edna had appeared on the porch steps to observe his technique with the considered air of someone who had opinions and was managing them. "You're going too thin on the second coat," she said. "I've done one coat," he said. "I can tell," she said, and went back inside. He painted thicker on the second coat. His phone buzzed in his pocket at 10:15. He looked at the screen without taking it out, angled it up enough to see the name, and then turned it face down on the top rail of the fence and kept painting. The buzz came again at 10:40. He didn't look. It was just past 11 when Clara Bennett came down the road. He didn't notice her at first, because he was working on the far section of fence, and she was coming from the other direction. And the first thing he registered was not her but the slowing of footsteps on the sidewalk, the specific sound of someone altering their pace when they see something that gives them pause. Then the footsteps stopped. "You need water?" He straightened and turned around. She was standing on the sidewalk with a brown paper bag in the crook of one arm and a reusable bottle extended toward him with the effortless ease of someone who has offered things to strangers her whole life without arranging it into a performance. She was not the kind of beautiful that hit you all at once and demanded you reorganize yourself around it. She was the kind that arrived quietly and then stayed. The kind you noticed more the longer you looked, because there was something behind it that had nothing to do with looking. "I'm fine," he said. Then he felt the sun on the back of his neck, which had been there for 2 hours, and said, "Actually, yes, thank you." She handed him the bottle. He drank. The water was cold in a way that felt specific to the moment, the way certain things are cold when you need them to be. "You staying at Mrs. Patterson's?" she asked, nodding toward the house next door. "Yeah," he said, "just passing through." He handed the bottle back and wiped his forehead with his arm. "Most people who are just passing through don't repaint their neighbor's fence," she said, and she was already moving again, shifting the bag to her other arm, and she said it without looking back and without waiting for his answer, and something in that, the not waiting, made him feel as though he had been given something rather than asked to produce something. He watched her turn the corner onto Sycamore Street and disappear. He picked up the brush. His phone buzzed again. He did not look at it. By 2 in the afternoon the fence was done, and the paint was bright in the way of things that have been restored to what they were supposed to be. Edna had appeared 3 more times, once with a glass of sweet tea that he drank on her porch steps, while she gave him the neighborhood history in rough chronological order, covering the Miller family who had sold their house to Nashville, people who never came on weekends, the oak tree across the street that had survived 4 tornadoes and was regarded by the whole block with something between respect and deference, and the girl who had given him the water. "Her name's Clara Bennett," Edna said. "Works mornings at May's Diner on the main road. Afternoons, she helps her father. Roy, he's got a bad heart." She paused. "Good land, though. Family's had it 40 years. Bank's been interested lately, which is never a good sign when a bank gets interested." "What kind of interested?" Nathan said, because he knew the difference between kinds of bank interest the way a doctor knows the difference between kinds of pain. "The kind where they call it an opportunity," Edna said. "Roy's had a hard couple of years. Flooding took the yield 2 seasons running, and the medical costs with his heart, it adds up. Clara's been holding most of it together." She said it without pity, just as fact, the way people who have lived long enough talk about hardship, as weather, as geography, as a condition of the landscape. "She's a serious girl," Edna said, in a tone that meant more than it said. "I'm just passing through," Nathan said. Edna looked at the freshly painted fence. "You said that already," she said. He ate dinner alone at the picnic table behind the rented room. a gas station sandwich and water from the machine, and watched the light change over the Tennessee hills in the long, slow way that light changes when there is nothing interrupting it. He could not remember the last time he had watched light change anywhere that was not through a window in a building on the 40th floor of something. The light here did not compete with anything. It just changed. He sat with that for a while. The problem with inheriting a company built by your grandfather and perfected by your father was that you were always watching things change: markets, quarterly projections, personnel, strategy. But the things that changed were never the right things. The company had grown 400% under his decade of leadership. His father had expressed pride before he died. In the careful, architecturally precise way his father expressed everything. His mother expressed pride now in a way that included a great deal of guidance about what he owed to the Callaway name, to the legacy, to the decisions his father had made on his behalf before Nathan had been old enough to agree or refuse. He said the name aloud to himself in the evening air, Callaway, and it felt like reading someone else's badge. He went inside, showered, and sat on the edge of the bed in the clean dark of the rented room and picked up his phone for the first time since morning. The screen lit up with the accumulated weight of 8 hours of unanswered communication. 14 missed calls. 6 from his mother. 3 from Graham Park, his general counsel. 2 from the estate manager at the family townhouse. 1 from an unfamiliar number that turned out, when he listened to the voicemail, to be from Vivian Ashford's personal assistant, confirming a dinner reservation in Manhattan for a date that was now 2 days past. He looked at the watch on his wrist. The Patek Philippe his father had given him at 25, the one that cost more than most families in Millhaven saw in a year, the one he had worn every day since the funeral, without thinking about it, the way you stop thinking about things that become part of your skin. He took it off. He held it for a moment, the weight of it familiar and strangely heavy in a way it had never been on his wrist. Then he opened the nightstand drawer and set it inside and closed the drawer. He called his mother. "Nathan!" Her voice had the particular quality it developed after several hours of managed worry, refined down into something sharper and more precise, the way reduction works on a sauce. "Graham says you're in Tennessee." "I told you I was taking time," he said. "You said a few days? It's been 10. I needed more than a few days." A pause. The sound of her moving through the townhouse, heels on hardwood, a sound he had fallen asleep to as a child, as reliable as weather. "Vivian called me," she said. "She said you missed dinner." "I told Vivian I wouldn't be there." "You told her assistant." "Her assistant books her calendar. That's the appropriate channel." "She is going to be your wife, Nathan. You do not cancel through an assistant." A pause, carefully weighted. "The board convenes in 3 weeks. The Ashford partnership has a formal deadline attached. Theodore was explicit about that. He needs to show his board that this is a done deal, not a negotiation in progress. Theodore Ashford, 70 years old, controlling interest in a shipping conglomerate that would expand Callaway's West Coast distribution by 30% if the partnership closed, or trigger a 12-month supply chain crisis if it collapsed, depending on which attorney's projections you used. Nathan had read the documentation 17 times. He understood the deal with the thorough, patient comprehension he brought to any complex structure. What he could not understand, had never been able to understand, though he had tried, genuinely tried, was why the deal required a wedding. "Mom," he said. "Don't," she said. and her voice softened in the specific way it had when he was small, and she was explaining something he didn't want to hear, and she knew it was going to cost her something to say it. I know it's not simple. I know Vivian isn't. I know this isn't what you imagined when you were young. But you have obligations to this family and to what your father built. The Ashford Partnership secures the Western Division for a generation. That matters. Your father knew it mattered. He put this structure in place because he trusted your judgment, and I am asking you to exercise that judgment. By marrying someone I don't love. By making a decision, she said, the way leaders make decisions. By weighing what is important and honoring it. A pause. Come home. A few more days if you need them. But come home and talk to Vivian properly. She is a reasonable woman. He was quiet for long enough that she said his name again. I'll call you Thursday, he said. Nathan? Thursday, Mom. Good night. He put the phone face down on the nightstand and lay back on the bed without changing and stared at the ceiling of the rented room. The cicadas outside were louder than anything he had heard in years, a wall of sound, layered and alive, not the city's mechanical noise, but something that had its own logic, its own conversation. He lay and listened to them and thought about a woman who had handed him a bottle of water and walked away without waiting to see what he did with it. He was asleep before he decided to be, which was the first time that had happened in a very long time. Clara Bennett's mornings ran on a system so well established it had become instinct. Alarm at 5:15, coffee consumed standing at the kitchen counter because sitting made her feel like she was conceding time to the day, out the door by 5:40 to check on her father before the home aide arrived at 6. She did the check not because Roy couldn't manage 6 minutes alone, but because her father had a habit, in the early morning before he was fully awake and fully committed to his better judgment, of skipping his blood pressure medication on the grounds that he felt fine and the pills made his hands feel slow. Clara's presence in the early morning was, functionally, a medication compliance system disguised as a visit. Roy Bennett had a bad heart in the medical sense. The left ventricle had been working at 62% capacity since the episode 3 winters ago, a number that Dr. Reyes at Millhaven Regional described as manageable with consistent management, and that Roy described as fine. Roy's definitions of fine had been optimistic his entire life. Fine had gotten him through 2 bad flood seasons, a slow market, and the 3 years after Clara's mother left, when he had raised Clara alone on the Bennett land without telling anyone he was struggling. The fine reflex was not stubbornness for its own sake. It was a man who had learned that naming problems could sometimes make them heavier before you were ready to carry them. Clara understood this. She also understood that understanding it did not make it less dangerous. She stacked the supplied delivery at May's Diner on Tuesday morning. 60 pounds of flour, a case of canned tomatoes, paper napkins, coffee, and she was arranging the last of it on the dry goods shelf when the bell above the door went, and she came out front and found Nathan Calloway sitting at the counter reading the laminated menu with the genuine, unhurried concentration of someone who has not yet decided. He did not perform being new. That was the thing she noticed first. People who came through Millhaven from somewhere else, from Nashville or Memphis, or, occasionally, somewhere farther, usually announced themselves in some way, usually without meaning to. A too casual look around the room, an over-friendly first sentence, the particular quality of attention that said, "I am noticing that this is different from where I come from." Nathan sat at the counter the way you sit somewhere when you are hungry, and a sign says breakfast, and your body has made the decision for you. She came around the counter. "What can I get you?" He looked up, and there was a brief internal pause. She could see it, the small adjustment, and then he said, "What's good?" "Everything May makes with eggs. Avoid the biscuits on Tuesdays." He looked at the menu again, then back at her. "Why Tuesdays specifically?" "May's sister comes on Tuesdays. They have strong opposing opinions about the butter ratio, and the biscuits are aware of it." Something shifted in his face. A door opening in a room that had been keeping itself shut for a while. He almost smiled, and it was the kind of almost smile that was more honest than a full one, because it wasn't ready yet. "Eggs and toast," he said. "And coffee, if you have it." "We have it," she said. She poured the coffee first because coffee was always first. He wrapped both hands around the mug the way people do when they haven't been warm recently, even though it was 72 degrees outside, and she went to put his order in. And when she came back, he was looking out the window that faced the main road and the hills beyond it with the expression of someone who has set something down and is not yet sure he's allowed to leave it there. "You fixed Edna's gate," she said, because it was true, and she had been thinking about it since she'd walked past it that morning and seen the white and the clean line of the hinge. "The hinge was bad," he said. "It's been bad for the better part of a year. Her nephew kept saying he'd come." "People say they'll come," he said. And then, "The fence was peeling." "I noticed." She looked at him for a moment. "That's a full morning of work for someone who's just passing through." "I had time," he said simply, and she accepted this the way she accepted most things, as information about what a person was willing to reveal rather than information about what was actually true. She brought his eggs when they were up, and she did not hover. That was the thing about working a diner counter for 4 years. You learned which customers wanted to be left alone, in the specific sense of wanting to exist without being required to produce conversation, and which wanted to be left alone in the other sense, which was less about alone and more about not being lonely. Nathan Calloway, she could tell at 30 feet, was the first kind. A man who had recently been in rooms full of people who wanted things from him. And what he needed right now was a mug of coffee and the right to simply be in a room without anyone's expectations in it. She gave him that. She was good at giving people that. He came back Wednesday, then Thursday. By Friday, they had something with the shape of a routine, without the deliberateness of one. He arrived at 7:30. She poured his coffee before he asked. He ordered eggs, and somewhere between the eggs landing and the coffee needing refilling, they talked, which was the natural product of two people sharing a counter in a quiet town in the early part of the morning. Not about large things. He asked her about the hills visible through the window, and she told him their local names: Pine Ridge, the Double, the back slope that people just called the Back, and the stories attached to them, the hiking trails, and the places where the deer came down in November, and the section of the Double where the cell signal was reliable when the rest of the valley was dead. She asked what he did back home, and he said business, and she let that be what he was willing to give, the way you let rain be rain, without demanding it explain itself. He asked about May, and she explained May, 63 years old, born in Millhaven, left twice and came back twice, had run the diner for 22 years after her husband died, and had opinions about eggs that other people had about politics. He asked about the community, and she told him about the church calendar and the farmers' market that ran through October, and the way the town had changed and hadn't changed in roughly equal measure over the past decade. On Saturday, he came in and helped her carry the weekly supply delivery in without being asked. She had come out to the back where the delivery truck was unloading and found him already there, hands on a case of coffee beans, looking at her with the question in his expression. "Is this all right?" She said yes, before she had finished deciding whether it was entirely sensible. They carried 60 pounds of flour and the coffee and the tomatoes and the napkins, and he stacked things correctly and in the right order without being told. And when they were done, he washed his hands at the utility sink with the careful thoroughness of someone accustomed to being thorough, and dried them on the work towel she handed him, and said, "You do this alone every week?" "May's shoulder," she said. "It's been a problem since last spring." "That's a lot of weight," he said. "You get used to what's necessary," she said, and she meant it as a straightforward statement of fact, but she saw something cross his expression that suggested he was reading it as something else, something that had to do with him rather than with delivery boxes, and she did not correct this because she thought he might be right. That afternoon, without planning it, she stopped at the top of Locust Street on their way back. He was parked near May's and going the same direction, and it was the natural ending point of the walk. And she looked down the slope to where Millhaven Creek widened into the stretch that locals called the river, without apologizing for the exaggeration. The 4 o'clock light was coming through the trees at the angle it only managed in September, turning the water the color of copper and old pennies, and she stopped because the light was doing that. "That's where people come when they need to think," she said. "Does it help?" he asked. "Depends on the problem." She watched the water. "Money problems, no. The water doesn't know anything about money. Heart problems, sometimes, if the heart problem is the kind you can talk yourself through. If you're just tired and you need to stop for a minute, yes. Reliably, yes." "Which kind are you right now?" he said. She turned. He was watching her with a directness that was not aggressive or presumptuous. It was the directness of someone who had simply stopped being indirect, who had set down the social mechanism for a moment. She found she did not mind it. "All three, I think," she said, and was surprised to hear herself say it. They went down to the bank. They sat in the grass above the water line, and the creek moved past them with the easy indifference of water that has been going somewhere for a very long time and is not in any particular hurry. She told him about her father, not in the way she performed it for other people, packaged into a version that was easier to receive, but in the actual version, the one she carried around inside her chest, where it was always too hot or too cold. The medical costs. The 2 bad crop seasons from the flooding, the timing of which had been almost cosmically inconsiderate given Roy's hospital stays the same years. The bank loan that had been extended once and could not be extended again without converting to a rate structure that would require selling the East Field, which Roy would not hear of because the East Field had been Bennett land for 40 years, and Roy had a relationship with it that Clara understood was not entirely rational and also entirely real. "He knows it's bad," she said. "He knows the numbers. He worked the land for 30 years. He understands yield and cost and margin as well as anyone. But there's something about saying it out loud that—" She paused. "It's if he says it out loud, it becomes the truth instead of just a problem. And he'd rather have a problem than a truth." Nathan was quiet beside her. She looked at him sideways and found him looking at the water with an expression that was not pity. She was alert to pity, had been alerting herself to it for 2 years, because pity was the thing people gave you when they didn't want to actually help, but needed to feel that they had engaged. And it was not pity. It was something more internal, something that looked like recognition. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know how that works." She did not ask him what he meant. She understood the way you understand things at a river when the light is doing something particular. That he was talking about something she didn't have rights to yet. Maybe not ever. He was passing through. She reminded herself of this on the walk back, quietly. The way you remind yourself of something you need to keep believing. He was passing through. He was still painting on Tuesday. The porch steps at Edna's this time, a secondary project he had apparently taken on, when his phone rang on Sunday afternoon. He was carrying Edna's grocery bags from her car, and Clara was on the porch steps, waiting to help with the high-shelf items, and he looked at the screen, and the stillness that had settled over him in the past week contracted slightly, like a muscle that has been relaxed being recalled to duty. "I have to take this," he said, setting the bags down. Edna waved him off with the magnanimous efficiency of someone who has lived long enough to know when to give people room. He walked to the far corner of the yard, and Clara helped Edna with the bags and tried not to listen, which was impractical because the yard was not large, and his voice, when he was not performing relaxed, had an authoritative carry. She caught pieces, not sentences, shapes. No. "That's not what Vivian, I need you to." And then he walked farther, and she stopped catching even that much. Vivian. She filed the name without deciding what to do with it. Filed it the way you file things you're not ready to open. That evening she told her father about the man who had fixed Edna's gate, keeping it casual, keeping it the size it was. A stranger passing through who was handy and quiet, and ate Tuesday biscuits without complaint. Roy listened with the focused patience he brought to most things and said, "People who fix things without being asked usually have something on their mind." "Probably," Clara said. "What kind of something?" Roy said. "The kind he's not ready to talk about yet," she said. Roy nodded. That was a language he spoke. She lay awake that night thinking about the name she had filed, and about the way his shoulders changed shape when he was on the phone, and about the east field going gold in the afternoon light that she might have to sell. Not because the thoughts connected exactly, just because the brain, at night, assembles the things you've been carrying and asks if you're sure you've accounted for all of them. In the morning, at 7:30, she poured his coffee before he asked. He wrapped his hands around it and looked up and said, "Thank you, Clara," the way he always said it. Not as social reflex, but as an actual statement. The thank and the you landing separately, meaning separate things. She thought, that is a small thing, and it isn't small. She went to take the next order and came back, and he was looking out the window again, with the set expression of someone who has finished having a private debate and arrived at the part where they say the thing. "She's coming here," he said, without looking away from the window. A woman I know. She's coming to Millhaven." Clara topped up his coffee. "Vivian," she said. He turned and looked at her, calculating briefly how much she had heard, then releasing the calculation. "Yeah," he said. "Her." "Okay," she said. "It's complicated," he said. "It's not what it... There's a lot of... Nathan." She said it gently. "You don't have to explain it right now." More coffee. He looked at her for a long moment, and the expression on his face was something she thought about afterward. Not gratitude, not exactly relief, but the particular look of someone who has been seen without being required to perform being seen. "Yes," he said. "Please." Chulki, she poured it, and he drank it, and the morning moved through its ordinary motions, and the biscuits were bad again because May's sister had escalated to strong feelings about the flour blend, and Nathan ate them without complaint and tipped exactly what was right. And Clara watched him from the corner of her attention, the way she watched things she wasn't ready to look at directly. At 8:50, May's television in the kitchen switched over to the local news for the morning update, and Clara heard the word Callaway, before the anchor moved on to traffic, and she stood at the counter with the damp cloth in her hand for a moment, just that moment. And then the next customer sat down, and she went back to the work of the day. The name was already in the drawer. She didn't open it yet. Vivian Ashford arrived in Millhaven on a Wednesday, in a car that was not technically a limousine, but communicated the same information. Long, black, unhurried in its turning radius, expensive in the particular way that does not need to announce itself because it is accustomed to being recognized. It navigated the corner onto Birch Street with the stately difficulty of something designed for wider roads, and deposited Vivian at the curb outside May's Diner at 7:58 in the morning. She stood on the sidewalk in a cream blazer and heels that were beautiful and precisely wrong for the particular topography of a small Tennessee town in September. She looked at May's the way you look at a property when you have been given a description of it, and the reality is accurate in every detail and somehow still not what you pictured. Then she went in. Nathan was at the counter. He saw her through the window before the door opened, had enough time to set down his mug, to feel the week of quiet contract back into something he recognized but had been glad to stop feeling. And then the door opened, and Vivian was in the room, and the room was aware of it, the way rooms are when someone with a particular quality of expectation enters them. Her gaze moved over the diner with a professional efficiency that Nathan recognized from boardrooms and charity events, and the kind of dinners that were not about food. Categorizing, filing, assigning. It found him at the counter, registered, and moved on. It landed on Clara with a fractional pause that was exactly as long as it needed to be to establish something without saying anything. "There you are," she said to Nathan, crossing the room with the ease of someone who is always where they intended to be. She bent to press her cheek against his, in the way that was a claim rather than an affection, a public notation of ownership rather than warmth, and settled onto the stool beside him with the practiced elegance of a woman who sits on inconvenient furniture gracefully because she has had to do it many times. "You've been very difficult to reach." "I wasn't hiding," Nathan said. "I told Graham where I was." "You told Graham?" "Yes." Vivian looked down the counter to where Clara was moving between customers with the particular economy of someone who is very good at their job and does not need to perform being good at it. "Could we get coffee?" she said, at the appropriate volume for being heard. "Thank you." Clara brought the coffee without hurrying and without cooling the room with her manner. She filled the mug evenly and set it down, and moved back to her station, and Vivian watched her go with the same professional assessment she had given the rest of the room. "So, this is it," Vivian said. She wrapped her hands around the mug in a way that looked studied. "It's charming, very authentic." "It's a good town," Nathan said. "Of course it is." She smiled, and the smile was genuine in the sense that she meant it exactly as much as she meant it. "Nathan, the timeline is not abstract. Theodore had dinner with my father 10 days ago, and my father is a man who asks questions when he begins to feel uncertain, and right now he is asking questions." She spoke quietly, not conspiratorially. She had no reason to be conspiratorial. She was not doing anything she thought was wrong, and her eyes were on his with the focused calm of someone who has prepared for this conversation. 3 weeks to the board meeting. The announcement has to precede the meeting by at least a week to give the institutional investors time to process. That's 2 weeks, Nathan, from today. "I know the timeline," he said. "Then come home." She picked up the mug, drank, set it down. "Come home and let's sit down properly. Not here." "We're sitting down now," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then her gaze moved again, briefly and with precision, to Clara at the far end of the counter. When she looked back, her expression had shifted in a way that was very slight and very clear. A reclassification, an upgrade of the problem's priority. "Who is she?" Vivian said. "She works here," Nathan said. "I can see that." A pause no longer than necessary. "She's very pretty, in a natural sort of way. The kind that photographs well without trying." "Vivian," he said, and the word carried a warning and a tiredness in equal measure. "I'm observing," she said pleasantly. "I'm allowed to observe." She set down the coffee, picked up her phone, checked something, put it back. "Dinner tonight. There's a restaurant in Clarksville that looks reasonable. Meridian, on the main street. 7 o'clock. I'll have Marcus send you the address." She stood, buttoned the lower button of her blazer with one efficient movement, and then paused, looking at the counter. Her $20 bill landed precisely at the edge of the space between their stools. She picked up her bag and walked out. Nathan sat and looked at the bill. Clara came from the register with $12 and some change, and set it in the center of the counter between them, clean and exact. "She left it for you," Nathan said. "We charge for coffee," Clara said. "That's the extent of it." He looked at her. She was straightening the napkin holder with the small adjustments she sometimes made to things that did not need adjusting. A way of organizing her hands when she was organizing something else. "Clara," he said. "You should probably go," she said. Her voice was the same as always, even warm in its way, accurate. "To dinner, I mean. It sounds like there's a lot that needs to be worked through." "We're not engaged," he said. Whatever she said, whatever she implied, we are not engaged. Clara looked at him directly, in the way she always did. With the full, unperformed attention that he had come to understand was simply how she looked at things. "But there's something," she said. Not an accusation. An observation. "There's something my family has arranged, and something I've allowed to develop past the point where I had a comfortable way to stop it," he said. "That's not the same as something I want." She nodded slowly. The napkin holder was as straight as physics allowed. "What's your last name?" she said. "Calloway," he said, and watched her face. She absorbed it the way she absorbed most things. Not with a reaction, but with a pause that was doing the work a reaction would have done in someone less disciplined. "Okay," she said. "Does that change anything?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her cloth and began wiping down the counter. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "Do you want more coffee?" He did not go to dinner in Clarksville. He called Vivian at 6:20 and told her, and she was quiet in the way that was more controlled than silence, the way she held things when she was recalculating. And then she said, "All right, Nathan, enjoy your evening," and ended the call before he could say anything else, which was its own kind of statement. That evening, while the light was making its long transition over the Tennessee hills, Clara walked home by way of the top of Locust Street and stopped at the slope and took out her phone and searched Calloway Group, and stood in the copper light, reading things on a small screen that placed Nathan Calloway in a context that was, by almost every metric, the opposite of a man who fixed fences and ate bad biscuits without complaint. She read for 11 minutes. She put her phone away. She walked the rest of the way home and made her father's dinner, and sat with him while he watched his program and answered his questions about her day, with the selective honesty she had perfected over 2 years of carrying things she didn't want to worry him with. Roy was in a good mood that evening, a good heart day, The days when his color was better and his energy wasn't the rationed, careful kind. And he talked about the old days when the Eastfield had run a market stall, when Clara's mother had still been here, when the farm had been something that expanded rather than contracted. She listened and said the right things, and thought about the distance between a man who painted a fence and a man who managed 9 figures of other people's futures, and whether the distance was the kind you could cross or the kind you could only look across. She thought the fence was real. The biscuits were real. The $12 left on the counter was real. She also thought real things can exist inside larger contexts that complicate them. She was still thinking about it when she went to sleep. Thursday morning he was at May's at 7:30, and she poured his coffee, and they talked about the hills again, and about Edna's nephew who had finally come to visit, only to discover the gate and fence had been dealt with in his absence, which had produced complicated feelings. It was a normal morning in the way that some mornings have a normalness that is doing extra work, maintaining a surface over something that has been acknowledged without being resolved. At 9:15, May called from the back that a woman had been to the hardware store asking about Clara Bennett and Roy Bennett's property address, and that Tommy Jeffers at the hardware store had given the address because he didn't know better, and was now being informed by May at some volume that he should know better. Clara stood with the phone pressed to her ear and felt the morning shift register. She went to see her father at lunch. Roy was on the porch with his afternoon coffee, in a better mood than yesterday, and he looked at her when she came up the drive with the particular clarity he got on good days when nothing was being managed or rationed. "Company's been by," he said. Clara sat on the porch rail. "Who?" "Woman named Ashford," he said, and let the name sit for a moment. "Well-dressed, very polite." She sat right there. He nodded at the empty chair across from him, and she explained who she was and why she'd come. His voice was careful and factual, the way he talked about weather. She said the Calloway family was aware of the situation with our loan and the bank. She said they were prepared to purchase the loan at the current balance and discharge it entirely, as a gesture of goodwill to the community. He paused. "Contingent on our having no further social relationship with her, with Nathan Calloway." She said it was nothing personal. Clara looked at the east field. "I told her no," Roy said. "Dad," Clara said. "I told her no," he said again, firmer. "A man comes to a place and doesn't say who he is, and then the woman he's apparently supposed to marry comes to my house and offers to buy my debt as a way of, as a condition of—" He stopped. His jaw was set in the way it got when he was angry, and trying to keep the anger at the right size. "I've dealt with banks for 30 years. I've dealt with a lot of people in this business, but I have never had someone sit in that chair and tell me that my daughter's company is a financial liability to be managed." "She didn't say it like that," Clara said quietly. "She said it exactly like that," Roy said. "She was just polite about it." He looked at the field. His hands were on the chair arms, and she could see the faint tremor in them, the one that came when he was stressed or tired. "I said no." She nodded and thanked me for my time and left. She had very good shoes. "She does," Clara said. Roy looked at her. "You all right?" "Yes," she said. "Clara." "I'm fine, Dad." She said it the way he said fine, as a container for something larger that wasn't ready to come out yet. She understood now exactly why he did it. She drove back to May's and finished her shift, and when it was over, she sat in her car in the parking lot and called Nathan. He answered on the second ring. "She went to see your father," he said immediately. which told her he already knew, which told her Vivian had told him, which told her the afternoon had been eventful for both of them. He said no, Clara said. I know. Clara, Don't apologize, she said. I'm not calling for an apology. I'm calling because… She stopped, found the actual reason. I'm calling because I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly. Okay, he said. When you drove down here, she said. When you got in the car and drove 400 miles south, what were you running from, and what were you running toward? Because I need to know if I'm the answer to someone's problem, or if I'm just… She stopped again. Outside the car, the Millhaven afternoon was doing its ordinary business. The traffic on the main road, the shadow of the oak tree at the corner, everything the same size it always was. I need to know what this is, she said. To you. What it actually is. He was quiet for a moment that was not evasive. It was the quiet of someone who is taking the question seriously enough to answer it carefully. I was running from the next 40 years of decisions I didn't make, he said. And I had no idea what I was running toward. And then I got here, and there was a broken gate. And then there was a woman who handed me water and didn't want anything back. And He stopped. I didn't plan any of it, Clara. I want you to know that. There was no plan. I know there was no plan, she said. That's actually the part I believe. She heard him exhale. Your father, he said. How is he? He's okay. He's angry, which is better than scared, so… She looked at the oak tree. Nathan, you need to fix what she started. I don't know how, but you need to fix it. Because she made it about me and my father, and that was… She pressed her hand against the steering wheel, steady. That was a line. I know, he said. I'm going to fix it. She drove home and made dinner and sat with Roy and did not tell him what Nathan had said on the phone, because Roy had given enough to this particular day. She sat with him until his program was done, and he went to bed. And then she sat at the kitchen table, alone in the quiet house. And outside the east field was dark, and the sky above it was very clear. And she thought about all the ways things could go from here. The ones that were possible, and the ones that weren't. The ones that depended on other people, and the ones that were just hers to decide. She thought, I don't know who wins this. And then, more quietly, I don't think winning is exactly the shape of it. At 7:41 in the morning on Thursday, the Millhaven Community Board Facebook group, which existed primarily for posts about missing dogs, church rummage sales, seasonal road closures, and the ongoing controversy about the speed limit on Route 9, received a post from an account called Michael A. Smith, which had been created 3 months ago, had a stock photo as its profile picture and had posted nothing before this moment. The post shared a link to an article from a Nashville lifestyle site that covered charity galas and business profiles with the glossy conviction of a publication that believes access is the same as insight. The headline was, Callaway Group CEO takes quiet Tennessee retreat, ahead of major merger announcement. Beneath it was a photograph of Nathan at a formal event. Black tie, the lower Manhattan skyline visible through floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, one hand in his pocket, looking at the camera with the composed ease of someone who has been photographed in rooms like this since he was old enough to stand up straight. He looked like a photograph of a different species from the man who had been painting a fence on Birch Street. The caption below the photo read, Nathan Callaway, 31, CEO of Callaway Group, reportedly vacationing in Millhaven, TN, ahead of a major merger announcement. Sources close to both the Callaway and Ashford families confirm engagement negotiations have entered a final stage. A formal announcement is expected to coincide with the upcoming board meeting. Clara read it on her phone at the maze counter between the 7:30 and 8 o'clock rushes. She read it twice, the way you read things that are clear and that you still need to read twice to confirm you haven't missed something. She put the phone in her apron pocket and refilled 3 coffees and took an order for a table of 2 and came back and read it a third time. By 8:15, the post had 14 comments. By 8:40, 21, and it had been shared 3 times into other local groups. By 9 o'clock, 2 people had come into Maze for reasons transparently unrelated to food. They ordered things and sat with their coffees and let their attention drift in Clara's direction with the specific quality of people who have information and are deciding whether to deploy it or wait for it to become mutual. Clara worked the counter with her usual efficiency and did not give them anything to read. Nathan came in at 9:50, which was later than his usual, and she saw from across the diner, before he sat down, that he already knew. His jaw was set at the angle it went when he was holding something controlled rather than feeling it freely, and his eyes moved to her as soon as he came through the door in the way of someone arriving to a thing they are both responsible for and responsible to. She poured his coffee and set it in front of him and leaned on the counter. "You saw," he said. "Yes," she said. "It was Vivian," he said. "She." The Michael Smith account, the timing, the sourcing. It's her. She didn't create it herself, but she had it created. "Nathan," she said, not loudly. There were people in the diner and they were not having this conversation in public. Not here. He understood. He drank his coffee with the deliberate patience of someone managing their own pace, and she brought his eggs, and they moved through the mechanics of the meal with the careful normalcy of 2 people carrying something they haven't yet found the right surface to set down. At 11, she had her break. They went to the narrow alley behind the diner, beside the recycling bins and the propped-open kitchen door with the exhaust fan turning slowly above it, and she leaned against the brick wall and looked at him. "Tell me," she said. He told her. Not the version shaped for sympathy. Not managed and curated toward a particular response. The actual version, the one with the edges still on it. The merger structure his mother had negotiated with Theodore Ashford while Nathan was in a strategy session in Tokyo that he had not been told was happening. The marriage clause, which Theodore had inserted as a condition of partnership on the grounds that family stability signaled long-term reliability to his board. A rationale that was medieval in its logic and watertight in its legality because Nathan's mother had signed the framework agreement before Nathan had read it. The fact that he had been living inside an arrangement he hadn't agreed to for 8 months, adjusting to it the way you adjust to a house that was built before you arrived. Working around the walls instead of choosing the floor plan. "And Vivian," Clara said. "She knows I don't love her," he said. "I think she's always known that. I think she considers it a manageable condition rather than a disqualifying one. She wants the partnership. She wants the Callaway name in a specific set of rooms in Manhattan. She wants—" he paused. "She wants the architecture. She's good at architecture." "And what do you want?" Clara said. He looked at her. The alley was narrow, and the exhaust fan was making its steady sound, and it was not a romantic setting, and she had not made it one. She had asked because she needed to know, not because she was arranging anything. "I want to not feel like I'm living someone else's life," he said. "I know that's not specific. I know it doesn't answer." "It's specific enough," she said. "What are you going to do about the board meeting?" "I'm not going back," he said. I called Graham last night. I'm stepping back from the CEO role. My cousin Archer takes the chair. He's been the operational deputy for 2 years. He's ready. The board knows he's ready. The partnership with Ashford falls through. The merger doesn't happen. Clara was quiet. That's a significant thing to give up, she said. It's a significant thing to keep, he said. Doing something because everyone has arranged their expectations around you doing it is not the same as choosing it. She looked at him steadily. Vivian won't just let the merger fall through, she said. She went to my father's house. She doesn't stop. I know, he said. Graham is handling the legal side. There are frameworks that protect Callaway Group from liability, even if the Ashfords pursue damages. He paused. And there's something else. He said it with the care of someone who has been holding information that belongs to someone else and is deciding this is the right moment. The anonymous grant to Millhaven Regional last year, the cardiac unit expansion, the equipment fund. Clara went very still. That was me, he said, through a Callaway Family Foundation. Dr. Reyes applied for the equipment grant. It was a well-constructed application. She made a strong case for the regional need. I signed off on it. I made it anonymous because you didn't want anything back, she said. Her voice was quiet and not yet readable. Yes, he said. She looked at the ground for a moment. When she looked up, she said, "Why are you telling me now?" Because Vivian knows about it, he said. I don't know how. Graham suspects she had someone look through the Foundation's semi-public filings. But she knows, and I think she's planning to use it as leverage somehow. The threat that she could expose it as a conflict of interest if I don't sign the agreement. He looked at her directly. I wanted you to hear it from me first. She absorbed this, the way she absorbed the large things, by going quiet and holding it. The exhaust fan turned. A truck went by on the main road. The grant fund, she said. Is it? Graham filed the documentation this morning, he said. An independent legal vehicle, completely separate from Callaway Group's structure. It cannot be clawed back, frozen, or used as a bargaining point regardless of what happens with my employment status. He paused. He's going to call you, to confirm. I asked him to. She looked at him for a long moment, long enough that the expression on his face shifted from controlled to something more uncertain, more open, the way a face looks when it has given up managing what it shows. You listed my father's name in the notification field, she said. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because he deserves to know that the thing keeping that hospital's cardiac unit running isn't going away, he said. Because the reason I put the grant in motion 3 months ago was that I had read about the regional funding gap, and I thought about what it means when the only hospital in 40 miles doesn't have the right equipment. And I thought... He stopped. I thought about fathers with bad hearts who don't say things out loud. Clara stood against the brick wall of the alley in the Tennessee morning and looked at this man who had fixed a gate and eaten bad biscuits and left the right change on the counter and done one significant quiet thing that she hadn't known about. And she thought about the East Field in the afternoon light and about Roy sitting in his chair with his hands shaking on the armrests, saying, I told her no. Go back inside, she said. Pay your check. Clara. Nathan. She pushed off the wall. I need to think. You need to give me room to think. She looked at him steadily. I'm not angry. I'm not ending anything. I just need... She paused. Found the word. Space. Actual space. Not a conversation about the space, Just the space. He nodded. He understood that kind of request, because he was, underneath everything, a person who also needed room to hold things without performing his holding of them. He went back inside. She stayed in the alley for a few more minutes. The exhaust fan turned. The truck sounds faded. At 1:20, Roy's neighbor called to say that Roy had taken poorly after the morning's visit. The blood pressure, the agitation he'd been holding since Vivian's visit had apparently built through the day, and his face had gone gray around the edges, and the aide had called the clinic. Clara left her shift without finishing it, which she had never done in 4 years at May's, and May told her to go without being asked. Roy was on a monitoring bed at Millhaven Regional by 2:15, Dr. Reyes running an EKG with the careful efficiency of someone who had been watching this particular patient for 2 years and knew exactly which readings to watch for. It was not an event, not a cardiac episode, not the thing they all feared. But it was a warning, the kind that arrived in the body when stress had been accumulating longer than the body could politely absorb it. Clara sat in the waiting area with her back straight and her hands in her lap, and thought only in 5-minute increments, which was the discipline she had developed for exactly this kind of waiting. Nathan called at 3:45. She answered. "Your father," he said. "Is he stable?" she said. "It's not an event. He's going to be okay." "I'm coming to the clinic," he said. "No," she said. "Clara." "No." She kept her voice even. "Please, let me handle this. Let me be the person who handles this." A pause. "Okay," he said. And then, "I confronted Vivian about the post, about going to your father. She didn't deny any of it. She said she was acting to protect the partnership. She said..." He stopped. "She said a lot of things. The main thing is that I told her the merger is not happening, and that I'm resigning the CEO role, and that if she pursues legal action, Graham will respond." Another pause. "I also told her that the grant fund is ironclad, and that attempting to use it as leverage would be a mistake she'd regret more than I would." "How did she take that?" Clara said. "She took it the way she takes things," he said, quietly, recalculating. Clara looked at the waiting room ceiling. "Nathan," she said. "Yeah." "When my father is home and rested," she said, "I want you to come and meet him, the actual him, and he's going to want to meet the actual you. Not the version that's passing through." She paused. "Can you do that?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes," he said. "I can do that." She hung up. Dr. Reyes came out 40 minutes later and told her Roy could go home in the morning. Clara sat back in her chair and let out a breath that had been waiting for several hours to be let out. At 9 that evening, Graham Park called. He walked her through the grant fund documentation with the patient thoroughness of a lawyer who has been instructed to make sure the person on the other end of the call actually understands what they're being told. The fund was independent. It was certified. It listed Millhaven Regional Hospital as primary beneficiary. Roy Bennett's name was in the notification field. None of it was contingent on anything Nathan did or didn't do professionally, personally, or legally. "He wanted you to know it was done," Graham said carefully, "before anything else happened. He wanted you to know that part was settled." She sat in her car in the clinic parking lot after the call and looked at the clinic building, the building where Dr. Reyes had worked for 6 years, where the cardiac unit had been updated 18 months ago, where her father's heart was currently being monitored by equipment that had been funded by a man who had listed Roy Bennett's name in the notification field without ever telling anyone he had done it. She sat for a long time. Then she started the car and drove. And she did not drive home, and she did not drive to the hotel where Vivian was presumably still staying, and she did not drive to the rented room on Birch Street. She drove to the top of Locust Street, and parked, and got out, and stood at the slope in the dark. The creek was running below. She could hear it, but not see it. The sky above the hills was clear and full of stars, and the night air was warm with the particular warmth of September in Tennessee that knows October is coming and is making the most of what remains. She stood there for a long time, and she did not try to solve anything. She just stood in the dark above the water and let the night be as large as it was. Morning came into Millhaven the way it always did in September, the light going from dark to gray to gold between one moment and the next, the birds starting before the light as though they had inside information, the air holding the particular cool that would be gone by 9, but was here now, clean and definite. Clara was on the porch at 6 with her coffee, sitting in the old wooden chair that had been on this porch as long as she had been alive, watching the east field come out of the dark. Roy was still asleep. He had come home from the clinic the evening before in the quiet, careful mood of someone who has been genuinely frightened by their own body and is not yet ready to talk about it. And she had made dinner, and they had watched his program, and she had sat with him until he went upstairs. She had checked on him twice in the night. Both times he was sleeping, his breathing steady, and she had stood in his doorway for a moment each time before going back to her room. She heard Nathan's car before she saw it. The rental's engine, too new to rattle but not new enough to be silent, and she watched it slow at the end of the drive without turning in. She watched the engine stop. She watched the door open. He walked up the gravel drive with his hands in his pockets and the look of someone who had been awake for most of the night, which she read immediately as accurate. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps and looked up at her. "I know you said tomorrow," he said. "It's technically tomorrow." "It's 6 in the morning," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then, "There's coffee." She did not invite him inside. Roy was still sleeping, and the inside of the house was Roy's. And this was not the time to bring Nathan Calloway through that door. She brought a second mug out, and they sat on the porch steps. Not in the chair, but the steps, where things were still open and unheld, and the field was in front of them, and the morning was coming in around the edges of the hills. "Tell me what happened with Archer," she said. He wrapped his hands around the mug. Conference call at midnight. Graham walked him through the transition framework. He was ready. He's been the operational lead for 2 years, and he knew, I think, that I wasn't going to be able to stay in the role the way my father had been, the way everyone needed me to. He was more gracious about it than I deserved. He paused. "The board will have an emergency session next week. The formal transition takes a few weeks in terms of filings and announcements, but it's decided." "And your mother?" Clara said. He was quiet for a moment. "She called 4 times yesterday. I answered the 3rd one." He looked at the field. "She said I was being reckless, that I was throwing away what my father built, that I was choosing selfishly." He turned the mug in his hands. "And then she said I sounded like my father when he was wrong about something and too stubborn to admit it. And I said I know. And then she went quiet for a while." "That's not nothing," Clara said. "No," he said. "She'll come around further. She loves the company the way my father did, like it's a person, like it has feelings and needs. But she loves me more than she loves it. She just needed to say the other thing first." A bird started in the field below, a low, clear sound that was neither morning bird nor night bird, but something in between. The first sound of the full day. Roy's window was still dark above them. The field was turning from gray to the first gold. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and the expression on his face was the different stillness. Not the choosing not to answer from the early days, but something more complicated and more adult. "Archer," he said. "I need to." "Go ahead," she said. He answered, and she listened to his half of it, which was long because Archer apparently had a full briefing ready. And she watched the field come up into the light and thought about what it meant to watch someone be both people at once. The man on the porch steps with the coffee, and the man who ran things, or had run things, or was in the process of deciding what running things meant when you did it on your own terms. She had been afraid these two people were incompatible. She was less sure of that now. "Archer," Nathan said, and his voice had the quiet, absolute quality she had heard once before, in the alley behind the diner. "The decision is made. I hear you on the liability exposure. Graham will walk you through the frameworks. The worst case is a 6-month negotiation that ends in Vivian's father deciding it's not worth the legal cost. The fund is independent. That part is settled." A pause. "I know it's a lot to land on you at once. I know the timing is, I know. But I've been carrying this for 8 months, and I am asking you to trust that I know what I'm doing." Another pause, longer. "Thank you, Archer. I'll call you this afternoon." He hung up. He set the phone face down on the step beside him, the same gesture as the fence rail, the deliberate face down that was the physical version of a decision, and he picked up his coffee and drank. "Archer's worried about Vivian's father filing for damages," he said. "Breach of the framework agreement." "Will he?" Clara said. "The framework agreement was between the Ashford family and the Calloway Family Trust. My mother signed it, not me. Graham says her personal liability is limited but real. She's going to have to deal with some uncomfortable conversations." He looked at his coffee. "She knew that when she signed it. She made a calculated bet that I would come around." "She nearly won," Clara said. "Yes," he said. "She nearly did." The morning had fully arrived now, the gold all the way across the field, the shadows running long from the tree line, the first sounds of the road beginning in the distance. Clara finished her coffee. She held the empty mug in both hands and thought about what she was going to say and whether she was going to say it, which she recognized as the thought you have when you have already decided to say something. "I called my aunt in Memphis last night," she said. "She offered to come and help with Dad for a few weeks while he's recovering. He doesn't know about the offer yet, which means there's going to be a negotiation about that. He'll refuse first, and then he'll accept, which is his process." She looked at the field. "I've been trying to figure out how to be in 2 places at once for 2 years. I'm not very good at accepting help." "No," he said. "Neither are you," she said. "No," he said again. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her, the way he had been looking at her since the first morning at the counter, directly, without performing the looking. The porch light was still on above them even though the morning had made it redundant, and it lit one side of his face and left the other in the early gold of the day. And she thought that was probably more accurate than the alley's shadow. "Tell me what you want," she said. "Not what you're willing to settle for. Not what you can arrange. What you actually want." He was quiet for a moment. Not evasively, with the weight of someone who has been asked this question so rarely that answering it takes the full attention they rarely give things. I want to be in a place where the decisions are mine, he said slowly. I want to build something, not inherit something and manage it and hand it on, but actually build. There are people in Nashville doing real philanthropic infrastructure work, grant-making that is responsive rather than institutional, that goes to the places where the application is good, and the need is real, and the money can actually move things. Not prestige giving. Actual giving. He paused. I've been thinking about it for 2 years. I funded the cardiac unit because I was thinking about it. I didn't know it would lead here. But it did, she said. It did, he said. She looked at the field. The east field, the one she might have to sell, was fully lit now. The late-season grass the color of old gold, running up the slope to where the tree line marked the Bennett property boundary. She had looked at it this way her whole life, as something to keep, as something that defined the shape of what was possible, as something that would be there after her in the way that land is there after people. Come to dinner Friday, she said. Roy wants to meet you. The real you, he already knows more than you'd expect, because Edna talks and May talks, and this is Millhaven. But he wants to look at you in person and make his own determination. She paused. Bring pecan pie from the bakery on Route 9. Not the grocery store kind, the one with the dark sugar in it. Nathan looked at her. Okay, he said, and Nathan. She stood, picking up both mugs. The watch. Wear it or leave it, but stop putting it in the drawer. You're not hiding from anything here anymore. He was quiet for a moment, and in the quiet she could see him process that. Not the words, but what was underneath them, which was, you are allowed to be the whole thing. All of it. Here. Okay, he said again. She went inside to make her father's breakfast. Vivian Ashford left Millhaven on Friday morning. She did not announce the departure. The Hampton Inn's front desk noted the checkout, and the black car appeared, and she was gone before the diner had finished its morning rush. She had spent 3 days in the town and had accomplished nothing she intended to accomplish. And one thing she had not intended, she had confirmed for Nathan's general counsel, Graham Park, that she was in possession of information about the independent grant fund that she had obtained through access to semi-public foundation filings, which Graham noted in a memo, and filed with the characterization, awareness does not constitute leverage when the instrument is legally independent. Vivian's attorney received the full fund documentation package from Graham on Friday afternoon. The call that followed lasted 37 minutes. The Ashford family's attorney called Graham back on Monday to say that his client was reassessing the terms of potential litigation. On Thursday, he called again to say his client was withdrawing the liability claim. The merger was formally dead. Theodore Ashford was, by all accounts, genuinely angrier about this than Vivian was. Theodore had wanted the West Coast expansion, but Theodore was 70 years old and had survived worse negotiations, and by the following month he was in preliminary talks with a different logistics company in Seattle. Vivian did not call Nathan. He did not call her. Some endings are not conversations. They are just the point where the math stops adding up, and both parties understand it simultaneously and set the paper down. Roy Bennett met Nathan Calloway on Friday evening at 6 o'clock. When Nathan arrived at the front door of the Bennett farmhouse with a pecan pie from the Wright bakery, and Roy came to the door in his good shirt, which was a statement, and looked Nathan up and down with the direct assessment of a man who had been reading People and Weather for 63 years and had found them to be roughly comparable in their reliability. "You the one who fixed Edna's gate," Roy said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, sir," Nathan said. "And the fence?" "Yes, sir." "She talk your ear off while you did it?" "She did," Nathan said. "I know the complete family history of 6 blocks in both directions." Roy made a sound that was his closest approximation of a laugh, which Clara had learned over a lifetime was the highest available form of first impression approval. "Come in," Roy said. Clara made pot roast. They ate at the kitchen table with the window open to the east field, which was the Bennett family's way of doing everything important, with the land visible as context, as reminder of what was at stake and what had been held. Roy asked his questions with the practiced patience of a man conducting an interview he had already half decided the outcome of, but was reserving the right to revise. He asked Nathan about his father, which was the question Roy asked everyone eventually, because Roy believed you learned most of what you needed to know about a person from how they talked about the person who had the most power over them growing up. Nathan talked about his father with the careful honesty of someone who loved a complicated person and had had time to understand the complications. His father had been brilliant and absent and precise in his expectations, and genuinely proud in a way that expressed itself as pressure. He had given Nathan the watch at 25 and said, "Carry it well," and Nathan had understood at 25 that carry it well meant more than the watch. Roy listened without interrupting. When Nathan finished, Roy said, "My father gave me 40 acres and told me don't waste it." He looked at the field. "I didn't waste it. But I also didn't know how to grow it past a certain point. I think sometimes the thing you're given is also a ceiling." He looked at Nathan. "What are you going to do now?" "Build something," Nathan said. "Smaller than what I ran. More specific. Grant-making and community investment. The kind that goes where the application is good, rather than where the name is familiar." Roy was quiet for a moment. Then, "Clara says you funded the hospital." "The cardiac unit expansion," Nathan said. "Yes, sir." Roy looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara, who was refilling his water glass, and not looking at either of them with a precision that suggested she was listening very closely. Then he looked back at Nathan. "You do that before or after you met my daughter?" "Before," Nathan said. 3 months before." Roy nodded once, slowly, which was Roy's version of a verdict delivered. He picked up his fork. "Eat your pot roast," he said. "It's better warm." After dinner, Roy went to his chair by the window, the good chair, the one he used when he was feeling strong enough to settle into something comfortable rather than practical. And he said goodnight to Nathan with the formal brevity of a man who has approved of something and sees no need to make a production of the approval. He said it to Clara with the extra second of eye contact that between the two of them meant more than words. Nathan helped Clara with the dishes. They stood at the kitchen sink side by side, and she washed and he dried, and they talked about small things, the bakery and its merits, Edna's nephew who had finally arrived and been mildly offended that his contributions were not needed, the name of the bird she had heard in the east field that morning. And then they talked about larger things, the way you do when the important things have already been said, and the rest can be approached gradually and without urgency. She told him about the bank loan and the refinancing she had signed. He listened without offering to fix it, which she had been watching for, because offering to fix it would have changed what it was. He asked the right questions instead, about the rate, about the timeline, about what it changed in terms of how the field was managed. And she answered them and felt, for the first time in 2 years, that the loan was just a financial structure rather than a symbol of everything that was unstable. Roy called goodnight from his chair at 9 without getting up, which was Roy's way of giving them the porch. They moved outside. The night was warm in the way of the last weeks of September when the season is making its decision, the air between summer and something else. They sat on the steps, not in the chair, still on the steps, where things were still becoming rather than settled. And the field was dark in front of them, and the creek sound was audible if you were listening for it, and the stars were coming out over the hills in the slow accumulation that always ended in the sudden sense of having arrived somewhere. "What happens?" she said, not afraid of the question, just asking. "I don't know the exact shape," he said. "That's the most honest answer I have. I have the consulting arrangement with Callaway Group for 6 months, while Archer gets his footing. Advisory only, nothing operational. After that, I have some conversations set up in Nashville with people who are doing the kind of grant-making I want to do. Some of it is remote, some of it isn't." He looked at the field. "Nashville is manageable from here, manageable distance, close enough that it doesn't mean choosing between things." "I can't leave," she said, not as a demand, just as the shape of her life, which she had made peace with and was not apologizing for. "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to." He turned to look at her. "I'm asking if there's room for someone who is figuring out what he is when he's not performing what he was supposed to be." She looked back at him. The porch light had gone off automatically at 9:30, and the only light was the stars and the faint glow from the field as the last of the day gave it up, and his face in that light was the face she had first seen at Edna's fence. Not the photograph from the gala, not the CEO, not the name, just the man. "There's room," she said. He exhaled, and she heard in it the particular quality of breath that belongs to someone releasing a thing they have been carrying carefully for a long time. "I want to do this right," he said. "Not fast, not arranged around what's convenient. Right." "I know," she said. "I can see that." "I'm going to make mistakes," he said. "I'm already in the habit of decisions that affect people without asking them. I'm going to have to unlearn that." "Yes," she said. "You are." He looked at her. "That's a very honest response." "You said you wanted right, not fast," she said. "Right usually involves honest." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The East Field." "What about it?" "I want to see it in the morning light sometime," he said. "You talked about it at the river. The way it looks in the morning. I've seen it at dusk, but not the morning." She looked at the dark shape of it against the darker sky. "It's best in October," she said, "when the grass goes amber, before the first frost." "I'll be here in October," he said. She looked at him. He was looking at the field with the expression of someone who has decided something and is looking at the thing they've decided toward. "Okay," she said. "Not a conclusion, not an ending, a beginning, which has a different quality. Open at one end, which is how you know it's real rather than arranged." They sat on the steps until the creek sounds got louder with the night, and the temperature dropped the way Tennessee temperatures do when October is close enough to feel. And the stars came fully out over the hills, the way they do, one at a time and then all at once. And the east field was dark, and the house behind them was quiet, and Roy was asleep in his chair. And it was not a movie. There was no music. There was no arrangement. Just the porch, and the field, and the night, and the two of them making room for something that had not asked permission to begin. There is a kind of courage that does not announce itself. It does not stand up at a podium and make a declaration. It does not require a witness. It wakes before the light and sits on steps with a cup of coffee and asks a person what they need before it says what it wants. It fixes a gate because the gate is broken, and not for any other reason. It lists a man's name in a notification field and tells no one. It says, "Come back when it's done, not before," and means both parts with equal weight. We spend a great deal of time believing that the harder choice is always the one that costs more publicly, the one that can be explained to a room, that earns the right kind of recognition, that fits inside a story that was already being told. But some choices are hard in the quiet direction. They cost in ways that don't translate into the language of strategy or legacy or what your father built. They ask you to trade the version of yourself that the world has organized around for the version that was always underneath it, waiting to be the right size. Nathan Calloway did not fix the Eastfield that night. He did not solve the bank or the 30-year mortgage or his mother's grief, or the 6 months of legal correspondence that Vivian's attorney would eventually let drop. He did not become simple. He was not a simple man, and Millhaven did not require him to become one. It only required him to be the man that was actually there, inside the one that had learned to perform being somewhere else. He sat on a porch step in September in a small Tennessee town and ate pot roast with a man he wanted to earn the respect of, and dried dishes he didn't have to dry, and told the truth about his father in a kitchen where the window was always open to the land. When Clara Bennett looked at him in the dark that night, he did not calculate or arrange or look for the version of himself that would read best in the room. He just looked back. And that, finally, is what it means to choose. Not the grand declaration, not the sacrifice that the audience sees and names. Just the moment when you stop performing yourself for the people who need you to be a certain shape, and you turn toward the person who is actually present, and you let yourself be seen by them without managing what they see. The Eastfield went amber in October, the way Clara had said it would. He was there when it did, and he stayed.